Good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Woo! We're here for a celebration. Good morning and welcome to the CGU Centennial Summit. My name is Jean Holm and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of Claremont Graduate University. Throughout this week, we have celebrated our university's founding as well as the people and the accomplishments that form this great institution. Today, we are looking forward, not just to CGU's future, but to the future of higher education in this country, a vitally important topic during this epic time of change. I want to welcome and thank the two guest panelists who will join CGU's president, Michelle Bly, in this important discussion. We're welcoming Michael Roth, president of Wesleyan University, and Cynthia Olivo, the president of Fullerton Colleges, who is a CGU alum. I'm also a proud alum of this university, having taken 27 years to earn 2 degrees. I think thanks to the professors in CISAT who endured with me through my on again, off again, but I just received my PhD this year. So in those 27 years, I have grown to love CGU, not only for what it has meant in my life, but for the opportunities it has opened to me, but for what it has meant in the lives of thousands of students and the faculty who have mentored them. I see you, faculty there. For 100 years, these students have ventured forth armed with knowledge and purpose to change the world for the better. Many flames make a great light. It is my pleasure to introduce one of those faculty members, someone who quickly established herself as an expert in the area of organizational behavior, leadership, and organizational culture. She then answered the call to serve as Dean, the Provost, and now interim president of CGU because she believes so deeply in the university, its mission, and its future. Michelle Bly is one of the most remarkable leaders I have collaborated with in my career. In this time of change and challenge for higher education, she is the ideal leader to ensure that CGU remains the essential graduate university well into its second century. Michelle Bly.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jean, so much for those kind words. Over 100 years ago, President James Blaisdell posed a daring question. Is it not possible to greatly improve higher education in this country by developing centers of learning that combine the special virtues of the small college and the advantages of the larger university? At Pomona's commencement in 1925, his colleague, William Bennett Monroe, warned that colleges stood at the crossroads. He asked whether we could build institutions that combined scale with intimacy, scholarship with community, a vision that soon took form in the group plan, a plan that led directly to what we now know today as the Claremont Colleges. That vision shaped a century of learning. But now, 100 years later, we stand again at a crossroads. And this time, the stakes are existential. Higher education is on fire. Public trust has eroded to historic lows. A recent Gallup survey shows that only about 1/3 of Americans now have confidence in colleges and universities. And that distrust is bipartisan, one of the few things Americans currently agree upon. Universities, once the engines of opportunity, have become magnifiers of privilege and stratification. Our faculty pipeline has narrowed to just a handful of elite institutions. Research findings are too often shrouded in a jargon that no one outside the academy can really understand. We've turned love into attachment bonding, joy into hedonic tone, and stress into psychophysiological arousal. The public hears this and rightly wonders, why does this matter? How have our lives, our leaders, our communities, and our democracies improved as a result? The reality is that by most objective measures, from employee empowerment to adolescent well-being, to perceptions of belonging, community, and connectedness, the data show that the combined body of all of this wonderful scholarship has not visibly improved our lives. Meanwhile, our campuses are increasingly closed off from their communities, cloistered in the proverbial image of the ivory tower. Tuition climbs and campuses shut down. We've lost 78 in just the last 3 years. And families ask whether or not higher education is still worth it. Gordon Gee once warned, the choice is reinvention or extinction. And Peter Drucker was even starker. Quote, 30 years from now, he said, the big university campuses will be relics. Universities won't survive. He made that statement 28 years ago. The fire is real. It threatens to consume us and the institutions that we cherish. But fire, as we know, can also illuminate. The challenge is whether we allow the flames to become a wildfire of destruction or a light that guides our society forward. We are watching institutions burn, but here's the good news. Fire is also a source of renewal. It clears the underbrush and makes way for our new growth. We see new growth in places where faculty stop being the sage on the stage and become, as they are here at CGU, facilitators, mentors, and co-creators of knowledge. We see it when students stop being passive consumers and instead become lifelong learners, stepping in and out of their university for new skills whenever they face new challenges across a lifetime of growth and continuous development. We see it when universities shift from insular ivory towers to social innovation hubs, places that communities can turn to solve their most urgent challenges, whether those be water scarcity, to mental health, to traffic, to AI. This is what ASU President Michael Crow has called for: universities as engines of social innovation embedded in the communities that they serve, shaping a future that is both relevant and inclusive, creating and demonstrating scientific impact, and measuring and evaluating that impact in clear and compelling ways. For as former CGU Professor Michael Scriven reminds us, quote, evaluation is the one indispensable activity of all science. And this is where graduate education must lead. At Claremont Graduate University, we are leaning into a radical vision where students find and have always found an experience that is personalized, mentorship-rich, supportive, and collaborative. A community where our students learn as much from one another's diverse experiences as they do from any textbook. Where research is not locked away in journals where only a few like-minded scholars read it, but where it's translated into plain language for the communities that need it most. Where programs help students find their voice, their direction, their purpose and passion, wherever and whenever they are, and whether they are left or right, conservative or progressive, so that they can be architects of influence in society. In the more than 2 decades I have been fortunate enough to call CGU my home, I have heard many voices echoing down our hallways and classrooms. Voices of awe and gratitude when worldviews are changed, perspectives are altered, and lives are transformed. This is education at its finest, when the world opens in new ways and you see with new eyes and hear with new ears, discovering ways of knowing that you didn't even realize existed. Education is at its finest when you weren't even aware that you had been missing something until your classmate or your professor pointed the way, opened the door, and showed you new possibilities in the world. Education is at its finest when you learn new vocab for what you thought you knew, and new ways of calling truths you always suspected were there, but might not yet have been able to articulate. Education is at its finest in a visceral way at commencement, my favorite day of the year, when tears reveal the joy of accomplishment and a diploma validates all of those years of effort. Graduate education is many things. It is a place, it's a way of knowing, and it's a community of belonging that fundamentally alters who you are and how you see the world. And graduate schools will always be the essence of what one of our most distinguished scholars, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, called, quote, a life worth living, a community of learning that helps each of us find our unique recipe for crafting that life. Graduate education helps us locate our life's purpose, and also how to locate that purpose on the map of humanity. Graduate education enables us to hone our knowledge and craft in a discipline and practice, and it pushes us to converse with those in other disciplines to together create something larger. In short, graduate education helps us realize our unique contribution as one individual in the sea of humanity, while also connecting us to a community of scholarly voices throughout human history that are both as old as humanity itself and as innovative and novel as each new discipline and discovery. It helps us become what Drucker termed knowledge workers in functioning societies that build on and evolve from a worldview of the generations of scholars and learners that came before. This is by no means a linear process, but an intricate and endlessly interconnecting, spiraling web of data and knowledge. This recipe of tradition and innovation, individuality and community is what makes graduate education so extraordinary and CGU's work of carrying it forward the flame so challenging and rewarding. This week, as we celebrate CGU's 100th anniversary and the transformative power of graduate education, the key ingredients of this recipe are visible in the hallways and gardens and plazas you will see on our campus. They include copious amounts of human potential, innovative spirit, creativity and curiosity, and openness to ideas both new and enduring. The recipe includes a mix of skepticism, discernment, debate, and critique, often subject to taste, before adding significant amounts of hard work, grind, grit, resilience, determination, and trust in the process and in the journey. And the recipe simply wouldn't be balanced without generous amounts of teamwork, collaboration, disagreement, and a constant recommitment to excellence, deadlines, and putting ideas into words. Stir in a healthy amount of risk-taking, fear, and questioning of original ideas and core principles. And don't forget to add careful instructions and comments from mentors, coaches, and peers, which help to guide each student along the way. And finally, continuously mix in feedback that is difficult to give and even more difficult to receive and believe before finishing with even more feedback. Graduate education is learning, unlearning, relearning, and finally, it's understanding. It's feeling the awe of mastery and the humility of naivete. And yeah, sometimes it's fun, complete with laughing and crying and beating your head against a wall or a book in frustration, and then finding new doorways you did not expect, and always new possibilities in locations where you didn't even know where to look. Graduate education done right is a force multiplier. It equips students not only with the skills, but with purpose. It allows them to engage their core passion, to create knowledge that matters, and to build communities where more people thrive. Here again, I'm reminded of Mike Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote, quote, "The best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile." Graduate education must be about cultivating those best moments. Not boredom, not status, not jargon, but the kind of deep engagement that fuels human thriving, creativity, and flow. Drawing on CGU Professor Kendall Cotton Brock's work, our vision is thus not merely to prepare graduates for work, but to prepare them for purpose, to embrace a life of intentional contribution. When universities become laboratories for purpose cultivation, they align intellectual development with moral imagination, producing graduates who not only know more, but care more and act more effectively in the world. The fire that threatens to consume us, the crisis of trust and relevance and sustainability in higher education, is real. But at Claremont Graduate University, we have long known how to work with fire. Our model was built for moments like this: intentionally small, deeply interdisciplinary, relentlessly human-centered, and adaptive by design. We've been practicing it for a century. The same spirit that forged our unique approach will continue to guide us forward as we evolve and experiment to meet the unfolding challenges of this new era. CGU will not simply survive the fire. We will show what it means to be renewed by it. The next 100 years of graduate education must be immersive, interactive, inclusive, community-based, and radically relevant. It must leverage AI, collaborative learning, and new pedagogies, not to displace faculty, but to empower them to guide students into deeper discovery. It must both leverage and magnify diversity. For as Emerit CGU faculty Daryl Smith observes, building sustainable diversity in higher education isn't just the right thing to do. It is an imperative for institutional excellence and for a pluralistic society that works. The future does not belong to the universities that reproduce privilege. The future belongs to the universities that cultivate passion and purpose and engagement and innovation, universities that are not closed ivory towers, but welcoming plazas and gardens that cultivate both human connection and deep reflection. Monroe closed his 1925 address by reminding us that colleges measure time not in years, but in centuries. When they build, he said, they are building for the ages. The next century of higher education cannot be built on the foundations of elitism and irrelevance. It must be built on openness, relevance, passion, and the courage to reinvent. If Blaisdell gave us the blueprint for combining intimacy with scale, then our charge is to combine knowledge with impact, to turn fire into renewal, to ensure that when the next 100 years are written, graduate education will not be an artifact of privilege, but an engine of social innovation for a thriving, functioning society. This is the vision that we're building at Claremont Graduate University, and one that I hope all of you will join me in helping to achieve. Thank you. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to acknowledge Cynthia Oliva, who is president of Fullerton College and alum of CGU. She will be an integral part of this morning's roundtable discussion, along with Michael Roth, who is our keynote speaker. Now I would like to introduce Michael Roth. Michael Roth has served as president of Wesleyan University, his alma mater, since 2007. He's a prolific writer, a public intellectual, and a passionate believer in academic freedom and intellectual diversity. He's also a longstanding friend of the Claremont Colleges, having served as the Hartley Burr Alexander Professor of Humanities at Scripps College for 12 years. He was also the director of European Studies at CGU and helped found the PhD program here in Cultural Studies. I warmly welcome and thank Michael Roth for being today's Centennial keynote speaker. Please join me in welcoming him with a big round of applause.
Hello. Friday morning in Claremont. Thank you for coming out this morning to talk about education and to look forward to hearing your questions and your thoughts about this moment in education, which is a pretty peaceful, calm time. Not a lot going on. You know, it's the kind of period of in education where I wake up and don't check my email first. I actually check the headlines. And I want to talk to you this morning about how to think about academic freedom in these times, how to think about some of the issues that have been raised within the academy about our successes and our failures, and to talk to you about the current assault on higher education from the White House, and how one should think about all those things from my perspective, and I'm interested, of course, in hearing your perspectives. I should say that having been in Claremont, my first job was here and at Scripps, as was noted, and I started teaching graduate students right away when I came to Claremont in European Studies and then Cultural Studies with my pal Elazar Barkin. And Josh, you'll hear from a little bit, he said to me that Elazar Barkin, who's now a professor at Columbia University, said to him, Claremont was a great place to be entrepreneurial. Now think about that for a moment. It's not actually the image that a lot of the Claremont College people have of the network of schools here. A lot of people think of them as safe, homey, wonderful teachers, great students, expensive, hard to get into, those kinds of things. But I think El-Azhar is actually it was so true. It was a great place to be entrepreneurial because it's small enough that you can try things, work with lots of different people across several disciplines, and experiment. But it's big enough that the experiments you do can actually resonate beyond the small town we're in. And I have to say, I loved being a member of the faculty at CGU and at Scripps. I am still in touch with my graduate students from CGU. The one thing about graduate students is they never graduate. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like, I have undergraduates, they go there now, I have their children in my classes, but graduate students, they call for advice. They have tenure. My graduate students from CGU have tenure. One at Smith College, one at Penn State, one at Colgate, another student I worked with has founded a magazine, was very successful. Another of my graduate students from CGU is the head of the Aga Khan Foundation and based in London. He's the head of the Aga Khan Foundation. He's from Oklahoma. His father was an air conditioner installer in the summer, and the only thing he knew when he was getting finished with his PhD is he did not want to take a job in Oklahoma. So he wound up taking a job at the Salzburg Institute, thanks to a connection from John McGuire back in the day and other people at CGU, and then he got a job at the MacArthur Foundation, not too shabby, and now at the Aga Khan Foundation. He builds universities all over the world. I tell you all these things because you should realize, I hope you realize, what a treasure you have in this school. It's beleaguered, it's financially challenged is the euphemism. It's hard to do the work. And on the other hand, having an institution that's dedicated to advancing knowledge across disciplines, making a contribution with specificity while not giving up the breadth of liberal learning, this is a treasure. It's so rare. It's more rare now than when I was here, more than 30 years ago. And we must not let parochial divisions, bureaucratic encumbrances, and financial instability dictate how to curtail the vision of the school, which is, I think, actually increasingly important. Increasingly important. We have at Wesleyan, which is mostly undergraduates, where I went to school as an undergraduate, and I should mention where I've worked very closely with another one of my CGU students, Charles Salas. We've worked together now for 35 years. He was my student at CGU, but I have been his student for all these years at the Getty and now at Wesleyan. And I think the reason those relationships have been so long-standing is because at the Claremont Graduate University, we were able to pursue learning with intensity and specificity while not giving up the breadth of knowledge and not giving up our concern that what we learn should be relevant beyond the academy. I can't tell you how many undergraduate teachers I've gotten to know over the years, some of whom are quite good at undergraduate teaching, who treat their students as if they were going to be professors one day. They make believe that in the class you learn how to write a history paper or you learn how to write a sociology paper. But most of the undergraduates are not going to do that. At the graduate school, we actually gave our students the equipment to make academic contributions while at the same time, insisting that they connect to the broader world. I'm thinking of my first student here from CGU, Bill Jones, who went on to be a professor here in Southern California, and writing about issues of fascism and German history in ways that changed our perspective on what the left critique of fascism should be. And he went on to teach in community colleges where he had to make that message applicable to people who had no intention of becoming faculty members themselves, but who wanted to use their education in their lives. Matt Jordan at Penn State, who was a CGU guy, he started an institute for connecting the humanities and communication arts to the broader community, from films to podcasts to all kinds of things. And that's like Josh's institute here now, or center, I'm not sure what you call it, where humanities and a public life, or a practical culture and the humanities. All of these things seem to me vivid, important experiments in connecting learning to public life. They don't have to be political in a partisan sense, but they are beholden to and want to contribute to the public. Now, in order to do that, and I'll get into the core of my remarks for this morning, in order to do that, you need academic freedom. In order to do that, you need the freedom to pursue questions where that pursuit takes you. And the ecosystem of academic freedom, it probably can exist with very different political regimes. I mean, when Kant wrote What is Enlightenment in the 1700s, he said you could have the freedom of inquiry and the freedom to learn even without disturbing an absolute monarch. So Kant was very clear. He was saying to the King of Prussia, "We mean you no harm, sir." He's much like university presidents today with Trump. And with I thought you'd get laughing at that, no? All right, thank you. Okay. It's like those, or the tech executives. Sir, we've brought you this beautiful glass sculpture of yourself, and we're very honored to, yes, sir. The North Korean approach to American democracy. And you can do that and still have academic freedom, actually, in the 1700s. You can imagine a situation where you had universities doing their thing, but you have a tyrant who says you can do your thing in the business school. You can do your thing in the chemistry department, but you can't do your thing in history. Now, I don't want to be too cynical, but there are some universities that will make that bargain now. Okay, so we'll give up a little academic freedom in some departments, but the money is coming to us, let's say, in molecular biology or health sciences or quantum mechanics. And so there we don't want to give up academic freedom, but they'll be willing to sacrifice in other places. I don't think that works today. It could have worked in earlier times when the university was less connected across disciplines, and when the university was less connected to the culture more generally. In other words, I think the ecosystem, just kind of logically and historically, the ecosystem of academic freedom could exist in various political regimes. In America, the ecosystem of academic freedom, which really dates from just around the time of the First World War, after the First World War, it has thrived because the government has seen its interest in promoting research and access at different times without interfering in the content of what people do. And that's come under a lot of pressure, and there's a kind of commonsensical reason for that. You say, well, we're giving you money, we should be able to control what you do. But it hasn't worked that way because everyone has benefited in everyone, by which I mean the country as a whole and the academy in particular, by the university's freedom to operate with government investment, even when that freedom to operate generated conclusions or lines of inquiry that were anathema to those in power. And that has been true for presidents, Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, over, at least since the Second World War ended. And as you know, it's under enormous pressure today. And so the existence of a school like CGU, where the research that's encouraged and the teaching that is encouraged is at the highest level. It is advanced knowledge. It's a graduate school. Its existence is important to me because it represents the power of academic freedom to lead to serious conclusions about serious matters that some people won't like. And so we need spaces in our democracy, in our culture, where serious people can come to serious conclusions that many others won't like. And that right now is under enormous pressure, assault really, from the White House, in particular the federal government more generally. So it doesn't surprise you that Michael Roth, the university president, the liberal arts guy, would say such things, probably. So I want to say a little bit about the criticisms of higher ed in regard to the ways in which we within higher ed have failed to pursue questions wherever they lead us because of our own internal biases. Or we just haven't asked certain questions. We haven't asked certain questions because we're too much of a monoculture. We don't have enough viewpoint diversity. You've heard these expressions. And so I want to say a little bit about this theme of viewpoint diversity. And I do want to get this right because I want to give a shout out to Yuval Avnor and John Shields and Stephanie Moravich. I'm getting that last name right, who've done some very important work on viewpoint diversity around the country. They're all hearing either at Scripps or at CMC. They've done some important work where they've analyzed the syllabi of courses all over the country and seen that some texts that are highly, let's call it partisan, progressive, are taught very, very frequently. I don't find that a problem. But the problem they point out is that these texts have been subject to a lot of scrutiny, much criticism, great debate. And here's, I think, the point they've made that I think is really important, that those debates are not reflected in the syllabi. The faculty seem to be teaching these texts as if they were just great books. Like last week I taught Rousseau. The students will come up to me and they say, Professor Roth, Rousseau says this about the state of nature, that there's no desire for power in the state of nature. I think he's wrong. My response to them is, no one cares what you think. Or they'll say to me, Michael Roth, you teaching Rousseau for the nth time here, and do you believe that people are in the state of nature good? And I say, no one cares what Michael Roth thinks. We're reading Rousseau, it's 200 plus years old. Let's try to figure out what Rousseau says. Or next week, Jane Austen, why she says what she says. And I think that's fine when you're dealing with classic texts that are worthy of study in a way that increases your admiration and suspends criticism until you really know you understand the stuff. But with these other more controversial books, that our colleagues in Claremont have identified on these syllabi, the fact that people don't seem to be teaching alternative perspectives to those works or criticism of those works indicates what either they call or I call, I don't remember if I invented this or just stole it from them, a premature consensus. I tell you all this because I want to underscore for you, I mean, both because to recognize this work of your colleagues in Claremont, but underscore for you, the enemy of education is premature consensus. And if you have academic freedom, but it just leads to premature consensus, then you're not going to be exploring questions that will make some people in your academic community uncomfortable. You're not going to be exploring questions that will lead to surprising results. And so the lack of what has come to be called viewpoint diversity, I've always preferred the term intellectual diversity, is a serious problem in the academy. You can have academic freedom, but if everybody thinks the same, then the freedom is wasted. Now, at Wesleyan, people will say to me, oh, Roth, we don't all think the same. You've got your Leninists, you've got your Trotskyites, you've got a few, now Mensheviks, we had them before. I mean, the range of political opinion, it was so narrow, it seemed to me, that about a decade ago, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal which would call for an affirmative action program for conservatives in the academy. This was in 2016. And it was funny because people had said to me, college president can't write a good op-ed because you're not supposed to make people angry when you're a college president. They may one day have money, right? So you know, you can't want to piss them off. But I wrote this piece, affirmative action program for conservatives, and it made everybody angry. And in 2016, the left didn't want to talk about affirmative action because they recognized somewhere in their brain, our brains, that it was very unpopular, even among its beneficiaries. And the right people on the right said to me, we don't need affirmative action, we just need a meritocracy. By gum. And everybody thought it was a bad idea. My point was that the academy was working out of prejudice. And it's so obvious, it seemed to me. It was so obvious, but I must say, I didn't see it myself. When I was here in Claremont, we started the Cultural Studies program. The Cultural Studies program is a program of left critique of culture. In those days, I thought, it just is critique of culture. Because I didn't actually know much about the right conservative critique of culture. I should have. I came here having studied the correspondence of Strauss and Kojève, and which I discovered when I was working in France. I mean, I knew there was a right critique or a conservative critique of popular culture and modern culture, but we didn't do much of that in cultural studies. And we didn't think of it as a prejudice. We just thought of it as the academy. It was like it was truth. That's dumb. It's a prejudice. It's a bias. And we have to correct it in the academy. Now, I've said that in 2016. I've talked about it at Wesleyan for 10 years. Our faculty is a little tired of it. Some of them push back. They say, how can you talk about intellectual diversity these days when you have a would-be tyrant or totalitarianism, blah, 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 blah. And I think it's more important than ever to be aware of the biases that we bring to our work, especially the humanities and interpretive social sciences. I was doing not a talk, but an interview, a public conversation in New York a few weeks ago, and the historian who was asking me questions said very thoughtfully, he had some doubts whether there were conservatives who wanted to be in the academy, and he put it this way. He said, in front of a big New York audience, he said, so you think there's a long line of conservatives who are qualified for being professors in selective universities? And everyone laughed. And I told him that he sounded just like the old farts at Princeton when I was a graduate student, when we said, why don't you hire any women? And they said, you think there are a lot of qualified women who could be at Princeton? We hire the best. And they just happen to have the same biological equipment we do. They didn't say biological equipment. It wasn't a phrase then. They just said, And we were outraged that they thought that their prejudices were grounded in meritocracy. Well, that's usually what meritocracy people are doing. They're just imagining that their evaluations are not biased. Our evaluations in the academy are biased, and so we need to bring more libertarians, people of faith, people, conservatives, into these disciplines. And it's going to get harder, actually, because for good reason, people aren't going to graduate school in these fields. I used to think it was just money. I said to a friend of mine, a libertarian friend who I brought onto the board at Wesleyan, he said, why don't conservatives join the professoriate? I told him at the time it took about 9 years to get your PhD in, let's say, a field like mine, history. Starting salary, this is like 13 years ago, 14 years ago, $70,000. I didn't have to say anything more. He said, yeah, they're too smart. No one's going to spend 13 years in school and take a job at $70,000 if they're conservative. I thought that would get a laugh too. But I'm misjudging my audience. So, so I do think viewpoint diversity is a real issue, but I also think it's very important that we not expect that the government will solve this problem for us. And I understand the impulse that we have not recognized our own biases in the academy. But I think the notion that the White House or any other part of the federal government would establish monitors to test people's ideological proclivities in departments is a sign of tyranny, not of intellectual diversity. And of course, these questions can be extremely nuanced. Last week, I told you, this past week, I taught Rousseau's Second Discourse, which is a discourse on the origins of inequality. Now, is it a conservative text? Hardly. Is it a leftist text? Surely not. What is it? I taught Aquinas this semester in a course on virtue and vice. There's Aquinas, you can't find a more countercultural figure for Wesleyan than Aquinas. I mean, the students are blown. They're like, really? We talk about Augustine. Is Augustine? They like that. Augustine, love God and do what you will. Okay, they like that. But these, or Machiavelli, or in any great books course or good enough books course, you're going to have figures who just don't fall into political categories. And I teach Aquinas with as much devotion as I possibly can. I am not a medieval Catholic, in case you were wondering. I've been president for a long time, but and I've not been a Catholic ever. I'm a Jewish guy from Long Island, but I teach Aquinas and try to convince the students to actually imagine what it would be like to live a life where faith was the central pillar of your existence. To understand what it would be like to privilege forgiveness and grace over judgment and justice. That last part is very interesting for my students because young people are my daughter says, judgy, right? They know how to judge. And that's the woke critique, right? Of that people are always judging each other. So we spend a couple hours talking about forgiveness in this class. And they think I hope they think that week, is Roth really a Catholic? And when we do Rousseau, they think, does he really believe that the state of nature was I want them to think that way because in order to loosen prejudice and bias, you have to think beyond the categories that you've been handed. And I think in the humanities and social sciences, People know that. We should practice it. But we should also hire more people and bring in more students whose life experiences and viewpoints are very different from the ones of most of the people on the faculty. Now, I think this is an issue not just for Claremont Graduate School or Wesleyan or higher education even. I think this is an issue for civil society in the United States. And I've written about this whenever I have a chance. I think I may have hit the daily double this week. I published something in The Nation magazine, which is on the J.D. Vance's list of magazines to be closed for, I guess, being communist, and something in The Bulwark, which is, of course, a Republican website. It's like within 24 hours of each other. And so I thought that was the weekly double. But in both cases, I wanted to argue to the audiences of these different publications that the assault on higher education should concern people who might not care that much about higher education, because it's an assault on institutions whose legitimacy does not depend on the federal government. And that's why I think actually conservatives should be so concerned about this moment. Conservatives who have long preached the gospel of localism, anti-central government, and the vitality, especially in the United States, of local organizations who, although they may have a tax break if you're a church or a hospital, or they may even get subsidies, they do not have to follow the ideology of the leader. And so this contemporary assault on higher education, sometimes under the rubric of anti-Semitism, which I think is totally bogus. And not that there's no anti-Semitism. I was in Claremont for 12 years. I know there's anti-Semitism. I taught at Scripps and CMC. I had a real wide vantage point, and CGU. There is anti-Semitism, but this assault has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, nor do I think it has to do with promoting a meritocracy. I do think it has to do with people with centralized power trying to take away the power and legitimacy of organizations in our country that do not depend on the federal government for their legitimacy. And, our colleagues at the Claremont Institute will tell you, if there, maybe some are here, that we first have to get rid of the deep state, which itself has, that's a conservative or the right-wing critique of the deep state, which itself has eroded civil society's legitimacy. But my father always taught me to beware of people who claim to be taking something from me for my own benefit, then I would realize the benefit much later on. And so I do think at this moment, the attack on civil society obviously it's not confined to universities, law firms, media, entertainment generally. I mean, it is clearly an effort to increase central power at the expense of learning and at the expense of the political legitimacy of non-governmental institutions. Finally, the last things I want to talk about, back to higher education for a little bit, is why am I talking? Who am I to talk to you about this stuff? I'm the president of a small liberal arts school, 3,000 students. Why am I talking about this now? And why shouldn't I just stick to my knitting and not object to what I've described today and many times in the past 8 months as abuses of power? This question, like why do you speak out, is often framed these days under the rubric of institutional neutrality. And so I want to say a little bit about that because I think it's such a a pernicious doctrine that gives the cover to cowards and under the guise of promoting free speech. But I want to be diplomatic, so. So the institutional neutrality, you probably know in 1967, the Calvin Report in the University of Chicago came out and said, heads of colleges and universities, and maybe not just the heads, shouldn't speak out on issues that are not central to the mission of the institution. And then there was a big, but sometimes you have to, there's a big exception made. At 67, Professor Calvin at the law school was trying to get the universities out of the crossfire. I mean, if you took a stand against the Vietnam War, you're going to anger some people and please others. If you supported civil rights for black people, you would anger some people. And so this was a doctrine to keep the university, under the guise, I think, of saying we're promoting free speech. It was a way of saying the universities should try to stay out of trouble because it'll be in their interest to duck when there's a conflict. And Jamie Calvin, the son of the author of the Calvin Report, who's a journalist in Chicago, wrote a wonderful op-ed some months ago in the Chicago Tribune about why the contemporary moment for Professor Calvin would have been one where universities would be required to speak up to defend their missions. I think, just as a historian, I find this very suspicious, all of it, because 67, it's not like they had a discovery about free speech in 1967. The free speech angle is this. If the university should be a platform where everybody can speak their piece, say their things, but the university itself shouldn't say anything. So that way everyone would be encouraged to speak. Now, most free speech folks have quoted Scalia, who said the cure for bad speech is more speech, but in this case, the cure was to be quiet. I think mostly to stay out of trouble. And in October 6th, 2023, between 1967 and October 2023, 9 schools said they believed in this neutrality principle. Whether they followed it is not so clear to me. Even the University of Chicago, the president would say things when it helped their cause. Since October 7th, 2023, I don't know, now 80 schools have discovered this principle of free speech. And the federal government, in its new invitation or extortion, I don't know what you call it, the compact constraint, they said they would require this institutional neutrality. How's that for free speech? And so I think it's pretty obvious that people like me, and presidents, said, if I speak out in favor of Palestinian rights, I'm really in trouble with some people. And if I speak out in favor of Israel, I'm really in trouble with some people. But if there's a principle that, and if I don't say anything, Larry Summers is going to call me a coward on Twitter. It's the only time he's been nice to me was when, I spoke out on October 7th. Here's a principle that would keep us out of trouble. It seems to me ludicrous, actually, on the face of it, as a historian. It doesn't mean people like me should speak out on everything. I don't know that much. No one has ever spoken out on everything. And so what should we speak out about? I know I'm running out of time, so what should we speak out about? We should speak out about defending the freedoms that make the inquiry and teaching at our institutions possible. We should speak out for the freedoms of civil society. While we can. I can't tell you how many times when I give talks like this, or at Wesleyan when I give talks to parents, someone will raise their hand and say, Michael Roth, where did you find the courage to speak out? And I was like, why would you? This is America. Why would you need courage to speak out? I mean, that alone is such an extraordinary change in the last 8 months. I mean, I grew up on Long Island. My dad was a furrier. he didn't have a lot of respect for authority, but he also was afraid of authority. But he taught me when I was a kid, if a policeman asked us to move along because we were sitting on the curb drinking root beer and eating Twinkies or something, I should ask for his badge number. It's like 8 years old. I'm thinking, what's your badge number, officer? And they did it. They would say, here's your badge. You know, I was a privileged white kid in a suburban town, relatively privileged. They weren't wearing masks. They had badge numbers. And they respected that, yeah, in our country, you should follow the law. And if you're a citizen or someone who lives here and you want to speak out, you might have repercussions. That is, someone may tell you you're wrong. That's a chance for you to learn. Someone may say you're an idiot or say bad things on social media. Fine. But you should speak out to defend the privileges, the rights of our civil society that makes it possible for us to learn together, to make mistakes together, and to correct those mistakes. If we don't speak out to defend our freedoms, they will be taken away. We see it every day on the news. And we can disagree about the border, we can disagree about tariffs, we can disagree about policing. I don't know, it's great. But we should agree that education, like democracy, depends on freedom. And we should do everything we can to protect it. Thank you.
Well, hello. I'm Josh Good, a professor of history and cultural studies. Thank you, Michael, for creating that department. And I'm here just to curate the Q&A for the questions that I'm sure we have for Michael Roth. So I was going to take the privilege of asking the first one, but I'm not going to do that. Looking at the size of the audience, I imagine there are going to be quite a few questions for Professor Roth or President Roth or Michael. So why don't we have at it? Any questions? I think there are roving microphones. Well, people carrying roving microphones. First question down here. Are there roving microphones?
You can stand up and we'll repeat it.
Yeah.
How can we get the politicians that we've elected to speak out?
I think you should urge them. The question is, how do you get the politicians we've elected to speak out? I think, and that's a great question. Like, you know, a lot of people ask, why isn't Congress doing its job? And it's the same. I think, you know, it varies, of course, from region to region, but the amount of fear is just extraordinary. I mean, fear of losing your job. I mean, I'm 68. I've been overpaid for years. I'm an academic and I'm the university president. I mean, it's crazy. And so I could lose my job, no big deal. But other people are, you know, they're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid, beyond that, of the vindictiveness of people in power. And so I think that's another reason. I do think it's hard to overstate the amount of corruption that's actually in play right now, and some people are benefiting from the new order. But I do think as voters, one can urge one's representatives to speak out, and I think these days it's very important to have strong communities, local communities. It's not just about Washington. I mean, I remember, I don't know how it is these days in Claremont, but I remember Claremont had this tradition of, I mean, the churches are strong, the kind of local institutions are strong, people spoke about community issues. I think just reminding people of the strength of our local authorities, our local commitments is going to be increasingly important over the next few years.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks for the talk. My question is, how do you differentiate free speech with hate speech? I mean, is hate speech part of free speech?
Yes, it is actually. I mean, constitutionally, there's no such thing as hate speech. It became. I wrote this book called "Safe Enough Spaces," and on free speech and political correctness. And so I thought this was a funny title. Apparently not. It's based on the old psychoanalytic notion of the good enough parent, or the first good enough mother. A good enough parent was a parent that didn't make you psychotic. That was good enough, you know. And I love this idea actually, because I have 3 kids, and you know, they have their issues. And so a safe enough space is a space where there's no right not to be offended. You may get offended. You may hear things you don't want to hear, but you're not going to be harassed or intimidated. So harassment and intimidation are not permitted under American free speech doctrine, and there are various rules about how to define those things. But I think it's really important for teachers and students to recognize that things that you find offensive are not forbidden in the company of adults. I mean, there are different rules for children, and in my classes we talk a lot about. And students today, I think, trained by teachers and faculty, they wind up saying, "Well, how can I talk to someone who denies my humanity?" And I get it. I don't talk to Nazis. I mean, I think there are limits to who you have to talk to, but that's not the same thing as saying there are limits on what they are permitted to say in the public sphere, no matter how offensive it may be. So during the encampment at Wesleyan, I had met with groups of Muslim students and Jewish students, and the Jewish students were very offended by some of the slogans that the students, pro-Palestinian protesters, were shouting, and I also thought they were offensive, and they were meant to be offensive to people who have a certain political orientation. But that doesn't mean they get stopped. They're protected speech, they're political slogans. If someone says, "I want to kill you," that's a different matter. So I think and many of us slipped into this, I think, that to define a classroom space or a campus space as one where you don't risk offense, I think that was a big mistake. But it would also be a mistake to tolerate students harassing each other, or professors hitting on their students or harassing their students. I mean, those are clear exemptions to the protected speech in this country, and rightly so. I have to give you one other example. At Wesleyan, a group of black students came to see me several years ago now, when a bunch of conservative activists around the country were having, I don't know if any of you remember this, the affirmative action bake sales. And what they did was they set up shop in the student center, and in our case it was an Asian American student who was selling cupcakes, and if you were white it was $1, but if you were black it was 50 cents. And the students said, "This is racist." I said, "Yeah, I think it is." And they said, "Well, we want you to stop it." I said, "No, I think it's, you should tell them it's racist." I said, "It's political theater. It's political theater to call out affirmative action. You guys should come up with something against it." But their instinct, and many young people today, was to go to a dean or a chair, or at Wesleyan Small, they can come to the president, and try to get relief that way. And I think that's a big mistake. I think students they were better off making a counter-protest, which they did. And they folded up their tent and took their cupcakes away. But I think if I had intervened, it would have been a different kind of issue, and it would have been a mistake.
Thank you. I'm the Dean of the School of Educational Studies, and I just want to put some context that Michael Roth is here today as our Bowen Lecturer, which is an endowed lectureship that allows us at CGU to annually bring somebody in to talk about issues that are specific to higher education. So if you're interested in the types of discussions that we have, join us for future Bowen lectures. And I also think it speaks to the importance of endowed lectureships. It says this type of discussion is important. So thank you for being this year's Bowen Lecture. It's appropriate that it is a conversation like this that centers the Centennial celebration, and that the School of Educational Studies was the founding school of CGU. But I have a question for you. What are the mechanisms, and are the mechanisms that we have sufficient that allow university presidents to talk about these issues amongst themselves as the leaders of our institutions of higher education? Do you feel like you talk about the importance of having an intellectual community to discuss? Is there a community of our university presidents, and is it sufficient to have these conversations?
It's a great question. I wouldn't call it a community, but I may be, may not be the nicest guy in the block, so there may be communities of presidents that I'm not a part of. I find college presidents, my son said this to me. I was having lunch with an agent, and my son is a screenwriter. And I said, the guy's, he wants to give me money. He said he's going to do an endowment. He said to me, did he give you the money? I said, no, he said he's thinking about it. He said to me, Dad, the guy's a professional liar. He's an agent. That's what they do. Steve Martin said, in LA, you can die of encouragement. So I think the college presidents, I go to a meeting of college presidents, I see this guy I haven't seen in 2 years. He used to have 2 arms. He has 1 arm. I said, what the hell happened? Josh, he said, I never liked that arm. It was always a burden. We always have to put a good face on things because we're always raising money. I am basically raising money now. If there's a Wesleyan person here, please come see me after. That's what we do. So on the end, we're competitors. And here's more seriously, that people who are trying to organize against the compact do so at their peril because in the compact there's a call for holding tuition down. And if people organize in order to change or affect tuition rates, that's an antitrust violation. Could be an antitrust violation. So we are competitors. There are groups of presidents who cooperate. We have national associations like the AAC&U and ACE and Citizens and Scholars. I think they do a good job of creating forum for professors presidents to talk to each other. But I'm not sure that's the issue. I think the issue is that presidents, if there should be thought leaders and not just fundraisers, and then they should speak out.
Question down.
Hi, President Roth. So some critics argue that the growing public distrust of higher education stems in part from universities' own political and cultural positioning over the past couple of decades, which I believe you referred earlier. Do you see that how do you respond to the idea that higher education current challenges are at least in part self-inflicted? And additionally, do you think it is possible to incorporate a more diverse representation of conservative voices and perspectives in higher education without the perception that the changes happen because of political and financial pressure?
Yeah, I think, typically my answer to this question is, like if we're in Ukraine and someone says, Ukraine, and it's not the greatest country in the world, there's some corruption, and we ought to do something about mass transit. And you say, well, actually, the Russians. Our problem is the Russians right now. And I think, yeah, we can definitely do a better job. There has been a decline of trust in higher education until this year. It went back up a little bit this year. Maybe Trump has done us a favor. Or maybe these surveys are not as reliable as survey people like to think they are. There has been a decline of trust in institutions in the United States over the last 25 years. So the decline in trust in higher education, although I think concerning, and there are real issues to fix, for sure, it pales in comparison to the decline in trust in the judiciary, journalism, Congress. Oh, how low can you go? And I think part of that, and we should take responsibility for this, is we live in a culture that has educated people in the arts of delegitimation. We've educated people to be cynical and to not trust. And our students, especially in the humanities and social sciences, what they learn is to be critical thinkers. And what they understand by that usually is to not trust anything. And to show that, I mean, I have a person that, maybe I shouldn't go that way, but there are sociologists in the country who, they have an association for the abolition of the university. They're all at universities. And there's something cute about that. I was a student of Michel Foucault. I know how to play that game. But it is a deeply pernicious game for a democracy, which requires a certain level of trust that your disagreements won't degenerate into violence, and that you have the capacity to learn from each other. So I think if we can survive this assault, working on how to create the kinds of conversations across political differences that will show people that universities are places where you as I said this week at the Times, you read Toni Morrison and Shakespeare. That's a really important resource for the country.
Okay, so believe it or not, from the Department of Time Flies When You're Having Fun, we have time for one more question, but we do get more bites at the apple after our panel conversation. So one more question.
Thank you. My name is Shada Subeta. I'm a CGU student, PhD student, political science. I was born in Libya. So I was raised under the regime of Gaddafi. My family were from the opposition. And so I was raised to say, in school, you don't ask questions, you don't speak, you gotta be careful because our family was assassinated. And then I left after high school and I went to a liberal arts school. That's where I learned to ask questions. And 4 years of that allowed me to speak so much, so I appreciate this whole academic freedom and all that. But then when I came to graduate school, and I'm also an adjunct faculty at a community college, I realized that this academic freedom is actually a lot harder to exercise. So my question is, how do we exercise it? I definitely feel constrained in my ability to ask questions that I actually care about or curious about. And I think that our questions, even in the literature, we don't have them. But there are so many constraints. At the graduate level, it's the faculty. Do I have somebody who can support me in these questions? The publishers and their methods and, especially for the questions that are difficult to just quantify in a simple measure and a nice p-value and et cetera, et cetera. And then we also have the problem of funding. Like I can have a question and then I would never get funding for it to even gather data. So at the end, the advice that I would get from multiple faculty at CGU is ask the question that gets you the job after. And so my question is technical. How do we actually exercise that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's such bad advice. No, I mean, I get it. I mean, it seems practical in the short run. I don't want to sound like a naive person or too idealistic because every discipline has constraints on it, and some questions are just going to sound silly to people, and probably because they are silly. And in other words, and some people aren't going to get funded, and they deserve funding. Well, most people don't deserve funding, and that's why we have competitions, and so there is always a gamble, and there's always some self-censorship. I mean, and I think that's just the nature of social discourse, and it's the nature of scientific or academic inquiry that some kinds of questions are going to be more popular than others. The key is, if you think you have a really good question and other people don't recognize it, first of all, you might be wrong. It may be a dumb question. And then secondly, if it is a really good question, your job is actually to make other people care about it. It's not just to pursue it, it's to make other people care about it. I mean, you're a center for humanities and practical life. It's like, in humanities, you study all these great questions. Some of them are perennial questions. But then what you have to do is, how am I going to make somebody who works in a museum care about this? Or somebody who works in a marketing firm care about this? Or somebody who works in a law firm care about this? And it won't be obvious. But that's your academic job, I believe, I mean, my first, my dissertation was on French Hegelianism. And the guy I wrote about actually wrote, I was about to say famous, it was famous for me. He wrote this thing, he said the destiny of the world, in 1944, the destiny of the world depends on how we interpret Hegel today. I believed him. I did, I believed it's Alexander Kojève, but my job was to make other people see why I thought it was that important and maybe think that was an important question. And that we probably don't do a good enough job in our classrooms of helping students acquire those skills like you're doing in your program, acquire the skills to talk to a business person or a teacher from a different field or whatever about why your question, why you care about it, and to describe it in such a way as they care too. And if you keep trying and it doesn't work, then maybe it's not the right question.
Well, that's a wonderful final comment to at least take a pause. In my classes, they're 3-hour seminars. We take a break in the middle. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to release you to go. We're going to take a 10-minute break, I think, and then reconvene for a panel conversation with that Michael will be included with and with other university and college presidents. So let me thank Michael for the thoughts and provocations and the appreciation.